And greetings. Welcome to the second ever episode of the QCast. I'm Bob Quillman, and I am really excited to be joined by Mike Schauer, the head men's basketball coach of the Wheaton College Thunder, and also the national chairman of the Division III Men's Basketball Committee. Coach Schauer, second ever guest on this fine show. That must be quite an honor for you, huh?
I feel like I've been finishing second to Ron Rose quite a bit lately. So I don't know how that makes me feel.
That's a fair statement. We'll get into that. We're going to get into that game, the season. But I really do appreciate your time in doing this. You know, the idea of this new little adventure is to talk to interesting people, primarily about Division III basketball, and just help to educate people, talk about interesting things. And I thought the timing was great on a couple fronts. The first is because you have a fantastic team that just finished 12-1, had an amazing season, and because you are the national chair of the men's basketball committee. And I think there's some really important topics that we can get into along that are timely.
Agreed.
But first, I wanted to ask you what it was like to go through this past season. I asked Ron Rose that earlier in the week, and I can't even imagine being a coach and what you guys just went through. What was it like playing through a pandemic?
Yeah, it was odd, Bob. Obviously, the most difficult thing is, I've been doing this for 30 years, almost 30 years, but nothing I had learned prior to this year really helped with this year. So the uncertainty of the season was the biggest obstacle. Even from the fall, not sure if we were going to be able to play. And then just on a day-to-day basis, going, today could be the day somebody tests positive and we shut down for a period of time. And I know Ron and Illinois Wesleyan went through several times where they didn't play because of somebody else's either positive cases or in our case, some contact tracing, things like that. So there was just this constant uncertainty that I think became very emotionally difficult. We just got fatigued with that emotionally. That being said, though, because there was sort of a preciousness to every day, I had a team that practiced with as much effort and joy as any team I've ever had, because I think they knew they were just thankful for that day. We get to play today. And it really made practice and so forth kind of simple because the team was pretty focused in the moment. And then to be honest, Bob, I've most Friday nights during the season, I'm somewhere recruiting, but because of limitations, the state of Illinois for much of the year wasn't playing high school basketball. I was home most nights. And so it was both emotionally fatiguing and yet a little bit easier in some ways, if I'm really honest. And, I just had a veteran team that was able to kind of handle the uncertainty. So it was both really fatiguing and difficult, and yet at the same time, a tremendous joy. And we were very thankful just to get to play.
One of the things that I find very fascinating with all this is what it took for student athletes to have a chance to test negative. And the reason I say that is because you could do nothing wrong and test positive, wrong place, wrong time. But to test negative for sure means that you made good decisions and you tried your best. And what was this season like for your kids in terms of just campus life and how they went about trying to avoid contracting the virus?
Yeah, I think our guys did pretty well. We didn't have a positive test at any point during the season, which I think is remarkable because, like you said, that's not necessarily having a positive test is no indication that somebody did anything,
right,
nefarious. It's an infectious disease. But I do know my guys worked pretty hard to sort of make as best you can to make our team our own bubble. And we talked about it a lot. I don't know how well they actually did that. I only know the results, which are that they didn't test positive. But I also limited myself. I didn't go to some of my younger kids' sporting events and some other things, and limited some of my interaction as well, because you kind of go, I would hate to be the reason that my team doesn't get to play. So I think our guys, and particularly once it became pretty obvious we were going to be pretty good, I think then we kind of all went, okay, let's make sure that we get a chance to play. So I was really pleased with them. But like I said, I don't know that there is a luck factor in it beyond just simply a sort of a discipline and those things. You have to be a little lucky to have nobody test positive.
What was the daily, the game day waiting for test results to know if you could get on a bus or whether someone was going to get on a bus and come to you? What was that like waiting to find out if you were going to be allowed to play?
Yeah, again, it was odd. One of the things I think has been positive from this, Bob, is I have had more interaction with the other coaches at other places than I ever did in a normal season, because we were constantly texting each other about
Right.
when our team was testing, when we would know results, when we got results, how close we were to arriving, because you had some protocols about entering a facility, getting to your locker room, those types of things. So I think we shared the experience a little bit as head coaches with each other, because it was just such an unusual experience. So um, you just waited and you kind of got used to it. I don't know if that's the right word, but it was, it was funny to do a post game and go, well, we're supposed to play on Thursday next week, assuming everybody
Right.
tests negative. So there was that constant uncertainty. It was just unusual. And I've honestly, I hope the things I learned from it, we never have to do again. So
As a fan, I could tell you it was very strange too. I told Ron earlier in the week, I said, I thought it was too stressful to contact you. So I wasn't texting Ron to say, are you guys on the bus? But I kind of found a network within the CCIW where maybe this kid might answer my Twitter message. Hey, so-and-so, are you on the bus, like heading south right now? I'd be like, yeah, we just left. I had to get kind of crafty as a fan just to know if my team
yeah,
was
what
playing,
we were
Mike. It was
doing.
very difficult.
Yeah.
Let's shift a little bit, and we'll come back to your team here. I want to first talk your national committee role, and there's some timely questions I want to get to. First, though, why don't you explain to folks what the national committee does and what the chair of that committee does?
Yeah, it's pretty simple what we do. We basically, broadly speaking, we pick the NCAA tournament field for men's basketball, basically the 20 at-large bid teams. We construct the field, and then we execute the tournament. And we do that obviously by regional rankings on a weekly basis, basically starting towards the end of January. Obviously, we're going to 10 regions next year. We've been 8 in my first 3 years on the committee, but we're going to 10 next year. And so that's really the simplistic role of the national tournament. The national committee, we regionally rank. We then from that we pick the 20 at-large bids. We make the bracket, and then we execute the tournament. That's broadly speaking the role of the national committee.
And in Division III, it's much less understood how this works than Division I. In Division I, I don't know that everyone actually knows it, but there's more people on TV that are talking about bracketology, and people think they know the terminology. In Division III, I can guarantee most people don't know how this works. And what I find interesting is I heard an interview one time where you said, I got involved with this in San Antonio when Mike McGrath said, you need to get involved. Were you one of those guys behind the scenes kind of taking pot shots at the process and saying, I can't believe, like, is that how that Mike McGrath thing turned out?
Yeah, not quite that deeply or that egregious, but I certainly had questions, as I think people probably do. And Mike, who's a very good friend, he just looked at me and said, well, get involved, right? I mean, you should get on the national committee. And I'd been on the regional committee in the Northeast when I was at Gordon. But to be honest with you, Bob, I didn't even know how you got on the national committee. I didn't know how that process happened. And fortunately, Mike kind of walked me through that. And we had an opening several years ago on the central central chair for the national committee. So I got involved, and I'm really thankful for it from Mike. And we'll continue to try to be involved in various ways. Obviously, it's a 4-year commitment to the national committee, but in other committees, other roles, just to be involved, because I think it opens your eyes to what is happening nationally and not just in your little part of the world or even your specific sport. And so I'm thankful for Mike for kind of pushing me that direction. And I say it all the time publicly. What I would tell every head coach at the Division III level is get involved. Find a way to be on your regional RAC committee. Find a way to get on a national committee. Get on your rules committee. Get on a committee. Because I think it'll broaden your relationships. First of all, I've worked with tremendous men and women on the committee who I've grown to love and respect and have a lot of fun with. But it'll broaden the perspective about how this works and actually how much work goes in to making this work.
And this isn't like a fantasy football draft where you prepare for it. Like you make a spreadsheet for a couple hours and then you do the draft for a couple hours. This is like a 365-day thing with a lot that's happening all through the year. Is that fair to say? Like this is a lot of work.
It's a lot of work, and it really intensifies for those of us who are coaches also serving on the committee. Really, as your season is intensifying, the amount of time you spend on national calls. You oversee your region, which currently would be the central region for us, but then you also are on your national call once a week, in which you review each of the 8, next year 10 regions, and decide if what the regional committee did makes sense, whether we should tweak it or change it a little bit. It is hours upon hours. And Bob, I tried to do it this year just to sort of discipline myself. But if you're on the national committee, you're watching as many games as you can. And not necessarily because you're going to use the eye test later on, but to be fair to teams, you want to be able to say, you know what, I watched you play. I watched these teams play, and be familiar with what's happening in other regions, particularly as really important games come up. Maybe 2 regionally ranked opponents will play. Maybe for the second time that year, and that will really dictate not only where they're ranked, but it might dictate what happens below them. And so to be really aware of what is going on nationally. So I'm watching a lot of teams play almost every night just to get a sense of what's going on. You know, I'll be at a recruiting event and I'll have a Division III game on my phone that I'm following. And so it's a lot of work if you want to do it well, if you want to really be broadly educated about what's happening nationally in this role.
And I'm glad to know that that you're watching kind of like a fan, and that you know that not every Division III stream is like that fancy thing you guys have at Wheaton with the replays and all the angles. There's some games, you got to admit, where the guy isn't panning the camera. There's action going on in the left basket. The camera's on the right basket. You've seen that, Mike. Admit
I've seen that. Yes.
Would you like to list all the schools? No, we will not say that.
No.
But it's fun watching Division III games because you see a lot of funny things and different gyms, and that's awesome to know that you guys get to watch games as part of that role. So, loaded question right here. There's a lot of discussion because the Division I tournament is starting tomorrow, and everyone's hyped up, and there's a lot out there in social media about what's going on in Division I, and I think it's making the Division III people sad, mad, upset, every emotion you can think of, because there is no Division III tournament this year. I believe there's a lot of confusion around why that is. So let me just give you the open-ended question. We'll go from there. Why were the Division III basketball tournaments canceled this year?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I'll try to do it justice. I think, Bob, there's a misconception or misunderstanding about the NCAA. I'll start there. There's sort of this sense that the NCAA is an organization above and beyond its membership, and is sort of cascading down decisions that we as members sort of have to deal with and embrace. But that's simply not the case. The NCAA is a membership-driven organization. There's almost nothing that happens at the Division III level, whether it's criteria, bylaws, waivers, that doesn't get voted on in some form or fashion by Division III members or representatives of Division III committees made up of Division III committee members that make those decisions. So the simple truth of the matter is, Bob, the NCAA didn't cancel the Division III Winter Championships. Division III canceled the Division III Winter Championships. And how did we do that? Well, one, we had low participation numbers. To take men's basketball, we had less than 50% of the country playing in a way by March 6th, by the deadline when we needed to pick our tournament. We had less than 50% of the country that was planning to play roughly 9 games and be ready to start a tournament. A lot of leagues started later, which is great. That's fine. I get that. A lot of leagues decided not to play. So we had very low participation numbers, under 50%. And the threshold was 60, and we could debate whether that's the right threshold, the wrong threshold. Right. Be willing to do that, but it was a very publicly stated threshold. We needed to be at 60%. And then secondarily, Bob, we candidly didn't have a whole lot of interest in hosting. We had the lowest number of host site applications that we've had, certainly in my time. And I just think schools were a little hesitant to have multiple teams come to their campuses. Many of us, Wheaton included, have some visitor limitations. And so there wasn't a great desire to host. We did not get a ton of host applications. third, we have a budget that we have to adhere to. And again, we can debate whether that's right or wrong, but a lot of the models I've seen people come out with on Twitter and so forth saying, well, you should have just done this, are things we certainly talked about, but they have some financial implications. So to bring 32 or 48 teams to Fort Wayne, we only have 5 flights. Well, there's almost no way to do that in a way that was going to be financially consistent with our parameters. And then lastly, Bob, not as discussed as much, although I think the D3hoops.com people discovered this as they started to want to put a tournament together sort of outside of the NCAA experience. We had a lot of schools, even that were playing, Wheaton being one of them, that had some travel restrictions. That the idea of sending teams overnight, sending teams candidly to certain states, prolonged travel, was not something institutions were completely comfortable with. And I think that's because institutions made decisions to not travel students broadly on their campuses. Right. So would they make an exception for men's basketball to travel? That was a difficult conversation. So, really, Bob, at the end of the day, not very many schools decided they were able to play and complete a season of 9 games by March 6th. We're also willing to host, if asked, multiple teams, and or willing to travel to any location and stay overnight. There just weren't that many teams willing to do it. So the reason Division III got canceled and Division II is happening, Division II met all those thresholds. They met participation numbers. They had host sites ready to do it and didn't really have to alter their tournament very much. They had to change their regions a little bit. But Division III got canceled because to be really candid, across the board, not just basketball, Division III wasn't really able to figure out as a collective membership how we were going to do a tournament that was going to be safe, fiscally responsible, and met some of the unique situations that each school was having to face. The good news, Bob, if you're following along, the NCAA just did the same questionnaire out to members at the Division III level about spring championships, and those numbers look great. So baseball, softball are right around 90%. Those tournaments will happen. And when people ask, why did the spring happen and the winter didn't? That's the answer. That 90% of the membership has baseball playing and 48% of the membership had basketball playing. That does not mean it's not unfortunate, devastating, difficult for those student athletes who are impacted by it. That doesn't mean any of that. I've coached for a long time. I do have seniors, some that may or may not come back. It's difficult when we decided we weren't going to do that. It was a tough conversation to have. I ache for those men and women. And Bob, this, I had a team that might've been able to win a truncated tournament. So absolutely. I would have loved to have played it, but the truth is we just weren't in a situation where we could quite figure out how to get that done. So the other thing I would ask, I don't even think some Division III coaches fully understand the process. The NCAA did not cancel our tournament and allow Division II. There's not a room someplace of men and women sitting around going, well, we'll let Division II play. We won't let Division III. Division III canceled Division III.
There's a lot to talk about in all that. First of all, I think it's the NCAA. What is the NCAA? It's a lot of people perceive it to be an organization with a bunch of people sitting in a room making decisions, and often ones that aren't popular. What you said, it's a membership organization. In this case, talking about Division III, it's Division III schools that are members, and decisions that are made happen among the schools, with the NCAA filling the role as a facilitator, administrator. But we're talking here about the presidents of universities, people that may or may not know where the gym is potentially. I say that in jest, but people that have a lot more on their plate than basketball, that are making decisions on what is best for their school, for their student athletes. And it's Division III membership that ultimately made this decision within certain parameters and not, quote, the NCAA. Am I summarizing that correctly?
That is well summarized. Yep, that's what happened. And again, it doesn't mean it makes it easier, but I think the understanding is important that we got to decide, and it's the decision that we made collectively to participate at a level that made having a tournament very difficult.
The other thing you mentioned is just budgetary realities impacting Division III. So every division, I assume, has some kind of budget to run its tournament. It's the reason people know there's a 500-mile rule. It's the reason I know that from Rock Island, Illinois to Worcester, Ohio is 500.0 miles, because there's things like flights and buses that come into play. So when people say, why didn't they play the first round at this site and then put everyone in a bubble in Decatur, Illinois? That was my original concept. I wanted to play in Decatur. I thought that'd be fun. Not feasible from a standpoint financially within the context of the flights and everything. You had issues there. You had issues that had to do with schools being not comfortable with their student athletes potentially traveling, staying in hotels. There were a lot of things in play here. I mean, is that
No
correct?
question. No question. And
Sorry about that, Mike. I lost you just for 1 minute. We were just kind of wrapping up some of the different elements of the budgetary constraints, the travel constraints, anything else that you would say to summarize just for, because I know that you care. Like, I know that in one sense you want to say, oh, I don't pay attention to that stuff, but it probably has to bother you as a national committee if there's things that are inaccurate floating around out there. Is there anything else that you would want to say to Division III fans, coaches, people that care about this stuff?
yeah, I think the biggest thing, I don't know when I broke out there, is if we had over 60% of the country participating, we would have had a tournament in some form. It was really the participation numbers were too low. And that's just the reality of it. And that is an indirect vote by the membership of Division III about having winter championships. We just didn't have enough teams playing.
I appreciate you taking that on. This has been a very tough time to be the national chair. And I think it goes back to last year was a very tough time with things being canceled leading into the Sweet 16 round. And it's been a tough time for everyone involved in that committee, because what I try to tell people is these are basketball people that are involved in this. This isn't, again, a bunch of people sitting in a room that don't know anything about the game. These are basketball people. If you look at the people on the committees, they're SIDs, they're coaches, they're athletic directors. They very much want these student athletes to get this experience. And it's got to be grueling for you as a basketball person to see 2 in a row canceled.
No question. And, really the one last year at the Sweet 16, I was actually the person that walked onto the floor at North Central and told WashU the tournament had been canceled. They were practicing. And I thought we were having one of the best Division III tournaments ever. It was going to culminate with the D2 and D3 championships also in Atlanta, which I thought was going to be great. We were going to send 8 teams to Fort Wayne. I really believe there was a chance we were going to send 2 CCIW teams to Fort Wayne. It was difficult on every level. And then to compound it by this year, no question, it's heartbreaking. I don't want to suggest my comments earlier suggest anything other than it was heartbreaking, but the decision was made by Division III.
Shifting gears within the national committee topic, and then we'll switch more into Wheaton and the CCIW, but a couple things. Let's just talk normal year stuff about how the process works. I think there's also a lot of confusion around how you guys make decisions. And there's some very black and white things. And anyone that wants to know what they are, there's a thing called the championship manual. And these are all right in there. And there's something called primary criteria, which says that the things you start with are the winning percentage, the strength of schedule calculation, and something called results versus regionally ranked opponents. It doesn't say winning percentage versus, it says results. Talk about, if you would, Mike, about how those 3 things are the starting point for your selection and seeding conversations.
Yeah, and I would add the other 2, because the other 2 in the primary criteria, the head-to-head obviously carries some weight, but the one that often gets overlooked a little bit is results against common opponents. So if we play a Wisconsin school and win or lose, as does Elmhurst plays that same school. If you're comparing us and Elmhurst, that's a common opponent. That game's going to carry a lot of weight as you compare Elmhurst and Wheaton because of a non-conference game. So results against common opponents can often be one that tilts the criteria one way or the other. So,
and we'll name that school Oshkosh. Can we name that?
Well, that helped me. Those things happen, right? And those
right.
things are significant, and it can be the second game of the season, but it still carries the same weight. So I agree with you, Bob. I think the criteria is pretty spelled out, and we try to follow it. without much deviation from it as best we can. They're supposed to be equal. Obviously, if it gets really close, we've got to decide which criteria maybe outweighs another, some of those types of things. Give me 1 second here, Bob. I think I know why we're fading out.
On the fly, folks. Mike Schauer, head coach of the Thunder, fixing some.
Better basketball coach than I'm a technology guy. Uh-oh.
You good?
Do I still have you, Bob?
Yeah, I'm right here. You good?
Great. So you got to kind of decide if it gets real close, what which of those 5 criteria is going to kind of carry the day. But it's very clear. One of the things I love about our process, Bob, is if done properly, those of you who follow Division III but are not in the room can actually get 17, 18, 19 of our 20 picks because the criteria is pretty clear, but yet it is not so rote, so mathematical that the 20 is obvious. We can have disagreements about a few. And I really like that. I think if the criteria was not very clear, we might not agree on, you might only get 12 of the 20. And if it was so rote, so mathematical, you could easily get all the 20 and we don't even need the committee. But the fact most years, Bob, you get 16, 17, 18 of them right, means it's working. If people want to pay attention, you really can follow what the national committee is thinking, really up until those last couple, where it's really, really razor thin between how we're going to pick certain teams. So, and then the secondary criteria does come into play from time to time, particularly your non-conference strength of schedule will carry some weight. So I always tell people who ask, listen, you need to play good people in your non-league schedule, because that will often sort of be a tiebreaker, is that secondary criteria. So again, we can debate the criteria, whether we like it, don't like it, but the criteria, Bob, was voted on by Division III membership. It's the criteria we've chosen to have across the board. And it's the one we try to utilize. And it is pretty clear if people want to follow it and know, hey, these are sort of the benchmarks I have to make to be a Pool C candidate. And so, yeah, I mean, it's pretty upfront. And like I said, those of you that follow along can almost go step by step with us.
And, people have dreams, Mike. And one of my dreams is to get like all 20 right. I've gotten 19 a couple times. I even remember last year it was Hobart. Hobart got me. I had someone else. My friend Dave McHugh, he might have had one right. I think I had Eau Claire. I remember these things, and my dream is just someday I get 20 of 20. I think I just retire from tweeting anything, and I just ride off into the sunset. But you're right. The reason you can do that is because, you can get 15 of them right pretty quickly just by saying winning percentage, SOS, regionally ranked results. I'm going to line them all up, and those seem to be kind of no-brainers. I know they require some discussion. And then those last 5, though, those can go a lot of different ways.
Yep.
There's always the tricky one. Now, I say there's always, like I've been on the committee. This is just me being on Dave McHugh's Hoopsville show trying to do this, right? There's the tricky ones where a couple polar extremes, you'll have someone with a really high winning percentage and a really low, like let's say a 900 winning percentage, in SOS that's under 500, and maybe barely any RROs. Then there's that other team that has maybe a winning percentage, might even be under 700, but their SOS is through the roof, and they've played a whole bunch of regionally ranked teams and beat several of them. How in the world at the end of the process do you, maybe even at the beginning, how do you stack those resumes up? Because that is always a point of discussion and debate.
Yeah, no question. So, Bob, what we try to do, and we'll remind ourselves of this on calls, and that is you try to you need to be consistent throughout the year, throughout the rankings of how are we going to handle those types of situations, so that, truth be told, when we get to the selections, a lot of times we've kind of answered that question throughout the year. And I can just tell you, the best way I describe it, people ask me all the time, coaches, what should I do to have a better chance at a Pool C? And my answer is always the same: play and beat good people. Your SOS and regionally ranked wins are going to carry a significant amount of weight. So if you have under a 500 SOS and no regionally ranked wins, that's a tough resume when compared to somebody who might be 5-4 against regionally ranked opponents, but whose winning percentage is a little bit lower because their SOS is also going to be higher. So there's obviously a line of demarcation where you don't have enough wins. You got to get a certain amount of wins. Winning matters. And so you're constantly trying to balance that. And is there an absolute way to do that? No, it's a nuanced way to do it. But the best thing I can tell people is you need to play and beat good people. And, winning bad non-conference games, or that doesn't, it's not gonna help you a ton. You need to put it on the line a little bit and go, hey, I'm gonna go play an Oshkosh or a Platteville or a Wash U, for those of us in the CCIW, and win. And if my answer always is, if you don't think you can go to those places and win, or have them come to you, you might not be an NCAA tournament team anyway. So go try to play some of those teams, and it might increase your loss total, but it's also going to give you a chance to build a resume that's going to be difficult to beat when it becomes the selection Sunday.
It's very well said. And just final question on that before we shift is, what do you tell the coach? There's probably coaches in this position that are trying to find those kinds of games and they can't. So maybe they're in a league that doesn't have like the CCIW and WIAC. Generally, if you play out that schedule, your SOS is going to be pretty good. It just is. It usually is. History says
Yep.
so. There's other leagues that's not the case. And what do you tell the coach that's having trouble finding the games they need to do what you're saying?
Yeah, what you described is the most difficult part of the process, because what you get a lot of times is really good teams from leagues whose league SOS isn't going to help them a ton, but are good enough that regionally competitive teams from other leagues don't want to play that team. And that absolutely happens. And there's not much I can tell them, in truth be told, because there's no sympathy vote, but you do feel for those guys.
Right.
Usually what I tell them is, if they can figure out how to get here, we'll play you. We'll play if you come to our tournament, that sort of stuff. But that is the most difficult situation, is when you get a team that genuinely would like to play nationally competitive competition that their league doesn't completely provide, and because they're good enough, teams are kind of ducking them a little bit. That's a hard situation.
To your point, again, not to be harsh though, it's not in the manual where it says, if you tried to schedule tough games and people wouldn't play you, then we're going to add something to your winning. Like, it's not, that's a really tough situation, because all you can do is use the criteria in front of you. And that's not part of that.
That's not part of it. So we just have to use the criteria. As difficult a conversation as that is, if they don't have the criteria, there's not a lot we can do for it.
Great stuff. I think that'll really help people understand. I encourage everyone to dig into the process. I was the guy, whenever back in the day, that, would say, well, I know that this team's better than that team because I watched them. And then people would, like Pat Coleman would say, yeah, but there's these rules and it's not fitting that. And so I had to, I had to have that Mike McGrath moment when back in the day. I had to learn how it worked. And it's helped me follow Division III, because I understand the implications of some of these games. When I think of a certain game, like a non-conference game, I know that that's a huge game because what it's going to do 2 months from now. And I think people would enjoy following Division III more if they knew that process. So thank you for going through that. I want to talk about your team. You guys had an amazing season. You were 12-1, and you were 12-0. And there's this CCIW thing that people are very proud of, and I am, which is that no team has gone undefeated in the league since Augustana did it in 1973. There's this incredible 47, 48 year streak. You guys are sitting there at 12-0. It's hard to get to 12-0. Very talented, unique team. Talk a little bit about your squad this year and kind of the way the season played out for you.
Yeah, I appreciate that. For whatever it's worth, it doesn't really matter now. If we'd been 13-0, I wouldn't have counted it. It wouldn't have been an undefeated season as compared to what you're talking about. I too am a CCIW guy, and we didn't play at Wesleyan, we didn't play at North Central, we didn't play at Elmhurst, we didn't play at Augie. It was a different year, and so it's not the same as doing a traditional 16-game season. That being said, winning 12 games in a row in our league in any format is very difficult. Yeah, we were. I knew going into the year we were a little better than maybe people nationally had a sense that we were going to be. I knew I had a veteran group. I knew Nami Adom was a rising star, unanimous first team all conference a year ago, but I could see him grow in terms of his comfort level with being a star. Sometimes great players kind of grow into that a little bit, and he did into that role. This team, just from day one, Bob played really hard. They did what I asked them to do. They were easy to coach. They wanted to win, and it's an easy formula when you have guys that will compete as hard as they can, who care mostly about winning. That's an easy team to coach. And if you have enough talent as a coach, to be real honest, you just try to get out of the way and just let those guys play. And was really proud of our guys. Thought we battled all year, and it was a season I'm thankful for, in the sense that I miss it. I didn't know that I would feel that way. I didn't know that we'd play a game, Bob, that I would have the emotional response to as I did the Illinois Wesleyan game, even though we lost. It was good to have a game that felt that big to me.
Right.
I'm not sure in November I thought we were going to have that feeling. I didn't anticipate getting quite as many games in. So thankful for it broadly, and really enjoyed it because I just had a really simple team to coach.
You know, and we'll talk about the championship game and the emotion to that, because even as a fan, you could feel that empty gym watching a game that felt like there were 3,000 people in there. It really did. But your squad, the unique thing is you had 3 star players, and every great team I've ever seen in the CCIW, probably in college basketball, not only has 2 guys, but there's a third. You know, when I think of some of the teams Illinois Wesleyans had, Douchis, Emilianovic, Freeman, we could pick any team and we could list 3 guys. You had that this year with Adome, Cruikshank, and Alioth. What a unique nucleus you had on the floor, and having 3 guys that good on the floor most of the time.
Yeah, no question. I really, I said it towards the end of one of the broadcasts. I'm not sure we deserved 3 first team all conference guys. Obviously didn't get it, but I think we had 3 of the very best players in the league. And they're very different players too, which was kind of nice. It gave us a little versatility, and really, Tyson and Namie were returning all conference players. It's really Cade that made a pretty significant jump. Even though he had a very good year last year, he really became an elite forward in our league, particularly rebounding the ball at just shy of 12 a night, which again in our league is hard to do. And so it did. It gave us places to get offense. They all compete defensively, which is not always the case with your best players. So they're a unique 3 to have, and probably as good as anybody's 3. I think there were teams that had as much at 8 that we did, but probably we had the best total 3 in the league.
And Alioth really is a unique kid. He's probably a little bit of an undersized low post guy. He reminded me a lot of Andrew Zimnick that played for the Titans back several years ago, in that a little bit undersized, but a scrapper and a battler. And I guess unlike Andrew Zimnick, he had some bounciness to him. Cade had a dunk in the middle of the lane that I did not see coming in that Illinois Wesleyan game. He's a very athletic, gifted kid.
Yeah, no question. I remember when I recruited him and saw him play live in Mechanicsburg out in PA, and I called back to Coach Panner, our assistant, and I just said, his athleticism alone is going to make him a competitive CCIW player. He is uniquely athletic by our level. And obviously if he were 6'8", he probably isn't at our level. But the fact he's 6'5", he is a little undersized, but is very bouncy, plays extremely hard, kind of has that sixth sense as a rebounder, tracks the ball down pretty well. Was really pleased to see his offense improve. He's starting to get to the point that he's comfortable shooting some perimeter jump shots. Went 4 for 8 from the 3-point line this year. Those types of things. So yeah, he really grew as a player. And Bob candidly grew as a leader, grew as a practice person, really became a very, very complete player this year.
The Illinois Wesleyan game, which there was a lot of buildup to that. I think that most of the league saw that as a collision course, that those seemed to be the 2 best teams throughout the year. It was hard to tell because, Wesleyan had so many games canceled, but it seemed like when you watched them that those were the 2 best teams. Going into that game, you've got an Illinois Wesleyan team that has lots of size, but also really good defensively on the perimeter. So what was the game plan kind of heading into that game? You guys had scrimmaged each other 2 months before that. You knew each other a little bit. What was the game plan going into that one?
Yeah, good question. It wasn't right, whatever I came up with. I think I'll answer what I wish I had done differently. They did such a good job of really crowding the lane when Namie got the ball. And I probably didn't do as good a job prepping my team to have some other guys ready to step in to take shots, and or simply put Namier in the post to eliminate having to go from 25 feet to the rim. Just put him at the rim and see how Illinois Wesleyan would defend that. I don't know exactly what they would have chosen to do with that. I wish I found out. The big thing is I felt like the real key was both teams shoot the ball at such a high level. I thought a big part of it was the ability to run them off the 3-point line. In exchange for that, though, we gave up way too many baskets at the rim. And, I think as a coach, sometimes you go, man, did I emphasize something too much and actually sort of leave the back door open, if that makes sense. And they ended up scoring up. I think they outscored us 44-18 in the paint, which is significant and really hurt us there. I think in some ways the scrimmage probably hurt us. I think Ron knew how good we were, but I don't know that because we were a 5th place team last year, all the 18 to 22-year-olds necessarily appreciated that we were pretty good. And I think that scrimmage probably went, yeah, Wheaton can go toe-to-toe with what everybody would recognize as a nationally good Wesleyan team going into the year. So it probably, I think maybe if we'd been a little bit more of a secret, that would have been a little bit better. But, Ron just did a great job of really taking away a lot of what we were trying to do offensively. And I didn't adjust to it quite as well as, when you look in hindsight, maybe I wish I had.
It was a very tight game too. When Titans got off to a big start, up 9 or 10, then it was tied. You guys had a couple leads. You had a lead in the second half, I believe. That game ended up being 10 or whatever, but that was like a 2 to 4 point game. It was as a fan, that was a stressful, tight ball game that came down to just little plays here and there. And you mentioned the intensity. So in the gym that day, that had to feel like an awfully big time environment, even though it was a strange, no fans in King Arena kind of thing.
Yeah, no, not just that game, Bob. The interesting thing is I really wondered what was it going to be like to play without fans. And once the game started, I think the intensity of the games all across the season really maintained a pretty high level, not just in our league, but really the games I saw around the country. But I will tell you, obviously, it would have helped us, even though there would have been a pretty strong contingent of Illinois West. I wish there was 2,500 people in there. I think that would have helped us moderately to be the home team. But I don't think it changed at all how hard anybody was playing, whether there were fans there or not. It felt a little unusual because those of us who've been a part of the rivalry for a period of time know what the Shirk Center looks like if that game matters, what the King Arena looks like if that game matters. And to have very few people there did feel a little funny, but I don't think it changed the intensity of anybody as the game actually progressed.
Yeah, I'm used to looking at that stream, and on that right side, I'm used to seeing a whole bunch of orange shirt kids behind that basket, and I've seen a whole bunch of free throws missed at that basket late in ball games. So I think certainly fans make a difference in the game, but it was cool how intense it was without fans. Yep. Just a couple more things as we turn the page to next year. It's a unique season because there's a eligibility waiver based on this season, which I think is a wonderful thing that was done. I don't know if you're in position to share who the kids are that are seniors. I know that Adom is already listed as a junior on the roster. I think he is a senior academically that's already listed as a junior. So that one's easy. Cruikshank's a junior on the roster. Is there anyone that's listed as a senior that you know for sure is back, or is that something that you're not ready to share yet or don't know?
Yeah, so I would say most guys are seriously considering it. Let me put it that way, and leaning towards coming back. I won't say that, I don't know that I'm comfortable to say I can promise it, because I think young men have to decide as they go through it. But, Namier has a medical red shirt, so he was kind of planning on the 5th year anyway, because he didn't play his freshman year due to a knee injury. And Luke Anthony was probably coming back either way because of football. So he tried to figure out how could I do both. So, guys, the older guys, I think are intending to try to come back, but to promise that or guarantee that, that could change too. But that is their intent at this point.
So if you look at the CCIW next year with a lot of uncertainty, but potentially your team returning most of its nucleus, Illinois Wesleyan losing 2 very key players that were on the floor in Wallen and Bear, but returning everybody else and having a lot of depth behind that. Elmhurst, I've heard Jake Rohde's returning. We'll see. Think of that team with Jake Rohde on it. I thought Carthage had a whole bunch of talent, most of which probably comes back, including one of the most talented players in the league. we could go down the line here at this point. I think North Park returns a lot of very gifted players and on and on. So you go into a league next year, and this is nothing new, but what a fun year next year could be, in a difficult year for a CCIW coach in a loaded conference.
We could be loaded. We aren't going to, we've had better teams than whoever our best team will be historically in our league. I'm not sure we will have ever had the depth the league is going to have next year, if in fact all those people return, because you could have up to 6 recruiting classes, depending upon what guys chose to do this year. If Jake Rohde comes back, it's actually his 6th season
right.
At Elmhurst, even though he hasn't played all those years. And think of this, Bob, and you would know this. If Jake plays this year for Elmhurst, there's a chance Wheaton and Wesleyan aren't the 2 best teams. They would have been
really
right in the mix with there. He's such a special player. And there's a chance you have a 15th ranked team in the country who's our 3rd place team. That's very possible next year, given the talent depth of our league. And I agree with you. I think Augustana returns an awful lot of talent. I think they didn't have the talent that we're used to seeing over the last 10 years, but Dua and Carr are pretty good players, as our all conference stuff indicates. So I think our league is just going to be incredibly deep. And I don't know necessarily what's happening around the country, but it's a chance it's one of the deepest years ever in Division III basketball because of the number of seniors who choose to come back.
And the CCIW is really a unique league. It's generally considered one of the top 2 conferences. And, a lot of people, and I think it's hard to say that anything other than the WIAC on paper should be number 1 because of how many banners they've hung in national championships. I think the unique thing about the CCIW, though, is like you said, 5 teams have been to the Final Four in the last 20 years. I believe this statement's correct. I think 5 teams have won a share of the title since 2017. There was that season where there was the 3-way tie a few years back that brought in North Park, Carthage. So it is a deep league. And while you go to the Final Four and you don't see as many national championship banners as the WIAC, I think what's unique is the depth of the conference. Would you assess the league in a similar manner?
No question. When I compare our league to other really good leagues, the difference to me would be the number of teams who have been good. There are great leagues around the country that basically it's kind of driven by a few schools that are traditionally great.
Right. And
maybe occasionally somebody pops in there. But, I said this when we went to the Final Four. So the 2020 season, the last year when Bosco and Gray were still coaching, we actually had 5 active coaches who had been to a Final Four.
Right.
I don't know how many leagues can make that claim at one time. And that's what makes our league so different is the caliber of teams. And it feels like a lot of people have been good for a long time. But if I'm honest with you, this may sound self-correct, the caliber of coaches in our league is really, really high. Because you don't end up at one of these jobs, and typically unless you've won someplace else first. And there aren't any easy nights in terms of the strategy part of our league either. It's just an incredibly deep league.
Well, in the best evidence, we lost at North Park in a game that was decided in the final seconds. If they had hit a turnaround shot 20-footer against you guys, you would have lost at North.
They should have beat us. They should have beat us. We won. They should have beat us.
And so that's a great thing is North Park finishes near the end of the standings. And yet the teams that played in the championship game had a whole bunch of problems with North Park. That's what I like about the league is that, there's the cliche any given night. It really does play out in the CCIW for sure.
No question.
You've been very gracious with your time, Mike. I appreciate talking through the national side and the CCIW side. What I would just say is, and then I'll give you the last word. I learned that from my friend Dave McHugh. I always give the guest the last word. I'm stealing that from my dear friend Dave. But in the seconds after the game the other night, what's funny, I always tune into the Wheaton game. Like if the Wesleyan game ends, I go over there because you get interviewed right away. Like they have you, the ball hasn't even come through the net for the last time, and you're getting interviewed. And the interviewer says, "Hey, what about the game?" And what I really enjoyed is you said, I don't want to talk about that right now. Let me just first say that, I respect the rivalry with Illinois Wesleyan and respect Ron. And I talked to Ron about this a little bit, and he put it well. He said, there's a lot more perspective in Division III oftentimes than other levels. And especially this year, there's a little more perspective than maybe in the past. Yeah, everything that we've all been through. I thought your comments were just, I told somebody that when I heard you finish talking, I said, that's how I would summarize what I love about Division III is I don't think you'd get a Division I post-game show that would quite sound like that. I've never heard it, and I don't know that I would. And so I just wanted to kind of get your take on that, and thank you for putting things in such great perspective.
Yeah, I appreciate that. It's simply how I feel. I actually, I obviously my son is on our team, and I've got two other younger boys, and I really want them to learn that the teams we play are the opponent, not the enemy. Like, you can compete against somebody that you don't wish ill will upon, and I want them to learn that. I want my team to learn that it's a competitive endeavor, and the next time Illinois Wesleyan and Wheaton play, I would like us to win. So I'm not trying to back away from the competitive challenge of it, but it doesn't have to have an animosity tied to it. And the truth is, this, Ron is a really good guy, right? I mean, it's not me said, he's just a really good human being. He's a good man and a great coach. And he will tell you, I've occasionally, when we're at a place recruiting, if we're not recruiting the same guy, I'll walk up to the other kid and family and say, you should go play at Illinois Wesleyan. It's where you should go, because I just have such great respect for him and his program. And I don't want to overstate it. I feel the same way about most of the coaches in our league. I just think they're good men and they're great coaches. And so if I brought perspective, that's great. It wasn't intended to do that. It was genuinely trying to say, I wish we had won. I heard from my team, but I think I can do that at the same time and go, Illinois Wesleyan's a great program full of really good guys. I don't know if you saw Charlie Bear come up to me right as I was walking over to be interviewed. Charlie's kind of from this area, so and is this first-class kid, right? He's great. So I have great respect for Illinois Wesleyan. I really like Ron genuinely, and it's a great rivalry because we do genuinely want to beat each other badly, but not with a feeling of animosity towards each other. It's just a little different than some other places that I've heard discussed. I don't have any interest in having that type of rivalry.
Yeah, I think when I think of the best basketball that I've seen played in the years that I've been around the league, I always go back to a few years after I was out of school was the Crabtree Simic versus Nadelhofer Senex Senef. And I'm telling you, I tell people I got to the JV game and it was already full at the tip at 5:15 at King Arena. It's the highest level, most intense Division III basketball. And then, the game at the Shirk, which Nadelhofer still says that potentially Crabtree's father was one of the officials. He's tweeted that out. I tell people it's not true. Going all the way through to Aston Francis buzzer beater at the Shirk and Eniame Dome's buzzer beater last year. And I always tell Jordan Kemper when I met him in person that I was like, boy, you really annoyed me. Like, you came out of nowhere and hit like 7 threes on us out of the blue. The games have been phenomenal between this, and that's pretty unique. Some pretty cool games between the two.
Really unique. And Bob, those games you were talking about in the mid 90s, I was sitting next to Bill Harris as a second year assistant coach in these games. And, that was really a return for Wheaton basketball. We weren't very good when I played, and you can certainly ask Dave Kunka and some other guys I played against how good we were. But, I remember sitting there going, I don't know that I ever thought we would get to the point that we're going toe to toe with a Denny Bridges coached Illinois Wesleyan team. And that was sort of the moment that I went, okay, Wheaton can do this. We can be competitive in this league. And those were great moments. I unfortunately can still remember Simic's put back at the Shirk Center. And then our game here that same year. And it was without question some of the most intense and most talent I've seen on a Division III basketball court. And I was just a nobody assistant coach at that time, but those were enjoyable games.
Well, again, I appreciate all your perspective around this. I think that, I told someone last year when Bosco and Gray retired that I was like, well, who's going to be the crazy guy in the league? I don't know that there is one. Is there a crazy guy left? Is there an intense guy, a guy that's going to throw the jacket? And Bosco, of course, a character. So I hope, Mike Schauer, that you will somehow develop some of that, because we need a little of that in the CCIW.
I might be able to match Gray's intensity. I will never match Bosco's character. That's not going to happen.
That's a tough one.
He is a unique guy. So
absolutely. Again, I said I was going to steal my friend Dave McHugh's line and give you the final words here today. Anything else you'd like to tell for anyone that tunes into this?
Yeah, I would just say thank you to you, to Dave, to d3hoops.com. I think one of the real great things about our level is are those of you who sort of shine a spotlight on Division III basketball and Division III athletics. There's a lot of good stuff going on at this level. And, we don't have the media coverage that takes place at the higher level, but the work you guys put in to give us some attention and stuff is just deeply appreciated. So thank you.
Absolutely. And of course, anyone knows that d3hoops.com has something called Patreon where you can subscribe. And while this show is not affiliated with them, those guys are my close friends. And I would do anything to help support those guys. And like you said, they've done an amazing job for more than 20 years now. So Mike, again, you've been really generous with your time, which I sincerely appreciate. It's been great to catch up. Let's do this down the road. Good luck. I know you're probably knee deep in recruiting and finding new great players for the Thunder. I hope that goes well. And we will see you on the court again next year. And I hope to be there in person when that happens.
Sounds good. Thanks, Bob.
Thanks so much, Mike.